And what I kept wondering when I was working on this documentary is, if they're so sure they're right, what are they afraid of? If they're so sure that their position is unassailable, let the other guy talk and then blow him out of the water and say, you fool, you didn't know this, this, and this.
Right.
But
Okie dokie, Stein. Let's play ball.
Darwin said nothing about how life originated. Darwin had no idea of how complicated the cell was. Darwin was never able to point to any clear evidence of any species that had originated by evolution. And there hasn't been much progress in Darwinism since then. Let the other guy talk and then blow him out of the water. And Darwin said nothing about how life originated.
You fool! Evolution is not a theory about the origin of life. It explains the diversity of life. Your statement is about as stupid as saying Newton was wrong because Newtonian mechanics doesn't explain light.
Darwin had no idea of how complicated the cell was.
You fool! Darwin had no more idea of the complexity of the cell than Newton had that matter was made up of atoms. However, this in no way undermines the validity of either evolution or Newtonian mechanics.
Darwin was never able to point to any clear evidence of any species that had originated by evolution.
You fool! Have you never heard about Darwin's finches? You also seem to be living in a time warp where you only consider the scientific understanding of Darwin's time. Well, what happens when you apply that to Newton? The strongest evidence for evolution comes from DNA and the whole genome sequencing. Pretending that the last 150 years of scientific research never happened is not a compelling argument against evolution.
And there hasn't been much progress in Darwinism since then.
You fool and double damn fool. Firstly, there is no such thing as Darwinism, any more than there's such a thing as Newtonianism, Einsteinism, or Faradayism. There is only evolution, which was first established by Darwin, just like there is only relativity that was first established by Einstein. Secondly, not much has changed since Darwin. It's really difficult to restrain one's anger when a man so willfully parades around his proud ignorance as a badge of creationist honour. Not much has changed since Darwin, you fool. There was the discovery of DNA, arguably the most important discovery in the history of mankind, and yes, it fitted exactly with evolution. Then there was the discovery of DNA replicase, messenger RNA, and virtually every aspect of biochemistry. Phospholipid bilayers, the Krebs cycle, RNA transcriptase, photosynthesis, ion pumps, sugar and lipid chemistries, most of them Nobel Prize-winning discoveries, and yes, every single aspect was 100% compatible with evolution. This is why no one takes Ben Stein seriously on academic matters, because he has an education more in line with the Dark Ages than the 21st century.
If they're so sure they're right, what are they afraid of? If they're so sure that their position is unassailable, let the other guy talk and then blow him out of the water and say, you fool, you didn't know this, this, and this.
Right.
But
Yeah, well, I think that just about covers it. Just because university lecturers and the such like do not consider it a prudent use of their time to spoon-feed people like Stein the knowledge which he has gone out of his way to ignore, does not mean that Stein's ignorance constitutes a devastating argument that can invalidate evolution, of which for some unexplained reason Stein thinks all of the smartest people in the world would not want to know about. I present the following clip of Stein discussing his documentary on evolution to demonstrate that Stein's education on evolution doesn't even make the textbook level.
And that we didn't just originate as human beings from lightning striking a mud puddle.
it said maybe life was created by lightning striking a mud puddle.
Did it come from lightning striking a mud puddle?
Located. How that happened by lightning striking a mud puddle is a very good question. Well, the first cause is not, it's lightning striking a mud puddle. See, this is what the evolutionists say. And by the way, they may be right. I'm not a scientist. They could be right.
Firstly, Stein's description of evolution here is about as accurate as saying that Christianity believes the universe began because an overweight three-legged aardvark called Ethel did a little happy dance. This particular brand of creationist logic is widespread by people like Stein, who are happy to believe that their ignorance of a scientific theory is proof why it must be wrong. I mean, by this reasoning, the fact that birds don't fall like apples proves that Newton was wrong about gravity. In this sense, Stein's documentary is about as much academic credibility as a burger flipper making a documentary on multiple scattering and absorption effects encountered with samples of high incoherent neutron scattering densities in nuclear reactors.
We would just like to be able to ask the questions. Maybe we're wrong, maybe we're stupid, but we'd like to be able to ask the questions.
Okay, do you think, though, that people who believe in creationism are being persecuted in America?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. We have lots and lots of evidence of it in the movie.
Stein's statements demonstrate that he doesn't even have a high school understanding of evolution or the scientific method. Stein confuses free speech with science. The two are not the same thing. The terms are not interchangeable. In science, merely saying something has little to no merit. You can say bananas prove God if you want, but it has no scientific merit. You can say that the earth was made by God in 6 days if you want, but it has no scientific merit. You can say that the sun is pulled across the sky by fiery horses if you want, but it has no scientific merit. Stein doesn't realize that the fundamental metric of the scientific method is you must sustain what you say with physical evidence, and what you suggest must be compatible with what is known from previous human experience. You can question any theory you want, evolutionary theory, atomic theory, theory of relativity, but if you want it to have any academic credibility, you must provide physical evidence to sustain your claims. To question the veracity of a theory without any physical evidence merely shows that you do not understand the scientific method. And yet, in a world with a finite research budget, and one where those who get funded are those who can compete on the world stage, demonstrating such a crass lack of knowledge of the scientific method will be the kiss of death for your academic career, just as surely as not understanding hygiene will be the kiss of death for a medical career. Creationists mistake the dismissal of a baseless statement as prejudice, when in fact it's an action that is required by the scientific method. In this sense, Stein's movie is not so much about prejudice in the scientific community as it is about his own ignorance of the scientific method. Stein's documentary suggesting that those who make baseless claims without physical evidence are being discriminated against is actually a manipulative effort to conflate free speech with the scientific method. Stein predates on the fact that many do not have a clear understanding of the difference between free speech and the scientific method, simply as an intentional effort to spread disinformation about a theory he doesn't like.
Well, but this is kind of, you've put your finger on something very scary, which is that there are very few places where more nonsense is spoken than in universities. I mean, universities, which are supposed to be the residual fortress of knowledge and sense, are the residual fortress of nonsense.
It's really difficult to know what to say about that, other than a man who considers Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, Princeton, Yale, Caltech, MIT, etc. as fortresses of nonsense is a man who has formally unplugged from reality. It's difficult to contrive what sort of distorted reality Stein lives in, where he thinks the foremost universities of the world are fortresses of nonsense, or indeed what a scientific documentary from such a mind would look like.